Welcome back to our short China business topic series. This one is on legal representatives in China. And if you have any ideas, please feel free to put it in the comments below. And we would appreciate if you hit that like and subscribe. Mark, the legal representative in China is a very unique type of role. And we've illustrated this with the whole Spider-Man theme here. With great power comes great responsibility. Do you want to give a little bit of context to the legal rep's role in China?
Yeah, so the legal rep, I don't know if it's unique because every company in China has a legal rep. And so the legal rep is really often seen as the embodiment of the final decision-making role, even if there's shareholder meetings or there's a board. The legal rep is the person that's really kind of seen as the buck stops here. In a WFOE, the legal rep can be the chairman of the board or executive director, or it can be the general manager. Joint venture, it's the chairman. And so, typically most WFOEs have boards, and all joint ventures have boards. And so the legal rep, he can convene the board, he runs the meetings, and because the board makes a lot of the big decisions, that makes him makes her very important. But in addition, the legal rep has the statutory power to represent the company and bind the company. So he or she can sign contracts which are binding. But also, if you are perhaps engaging with authorities, the authorities will understand if they're talking to the legal rep, they're talking to the right person. If there's a problem, with the police or whatever, they will often say, well, where's the legal rep? And so the perhaps active role that you have to do is not so big. There are some documents that need the legal rep to sign off on, might be some tax filings. And then with contracts and bids, that will really depend on your counterparts, but a lot of banks will want to see the legal rep signature. A lot of bids will want the legal rep to sign off on the tender. So it can be actually quite a few documents to sign off on. And so, what we see is, and this will talk mostly about perhaps the risks and liabilities of legal reps, but because the legal rep has this enormous amount of reserve power, we would recommend to clients not to combine that role with an active management role. So let's say if it's a wholly foreign owned enterprise, it would probably be best to have a separate person as the chairman or the chairman of the board, who will be the legal rep, and have that person in head office rather than combine it with the general manager. Because if you have a problem with the general manager, it becomes very difficult to know how to terminate the general manager. So for that reason, we would prefer that they're two separate people.
And Mark, what are some of the issues that legal representatives should keep an eye on since they are the legal rep, the buck does stop with them? What are some of the things that they need to keep in mind?
So I think, one of the issues we have is, some companies never ask about it. Some companies ask a lot of questions at the start of the China business. This will be one of their key issues is the liability of the board and the legal rep. And so I think, first thing, which is perhaps not really typical for lawyers to say, look, it's not really for most people a major issue. So liability in China will mostly lie with the company. So if the company does something wrong, it's mostly the company who's going to have to deal with it. But personal liability is possible. And I think, in practice, it only really comes up if there's a case of non-compliance, if there's bribery, if there's fraud, if there's tax evasion, if there's smuggling, or if something, very unexpected happens. So, something which is unexpected, where we've seen people as legal reps, be involved or pulled into things, were mostly unexpected things happening. So we haven't really had any of our clients engage in massive frauds or tax evasion so far, but things have been like there was a factory fire where some people died. There was an employee died because a piece of machinery fell on the employee and they didn't have the right system in place to get that person to hospital care, so the person slowly bled to death. Another case was some gas cylinders exploded and killed some people. So this is over a 20-year period. So we haven't seen it very often, but normally if there's a liability issue for the legal rep, something very bad has happened.
And we have here a couple different points that a legal rep can point to in order to protect themselves. We'll go through them a little bit briefly. Mark, diligence as a defense for legal reps?
So I think, look, the main issue is, you do have a duty of care as a director or chairman in a company. And so the conditions are not very, I don't think they're onerous in China. So if you're going to be prudent, you should attend board meetings. Legally, you only need to have one a year. I would suggest to people they have them more often, and keep the board minutes. We've had companies who've been in existence for 10 years, and they haven't bothered to have a company board meeting for 10 years. And so I think the issues are, make sure you comply with those formal requirements. If there's a supervisor question, you refer to them. Again, that might be in a joint venture, very unlikely in a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. If the supervisor is jumping up in a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, then that probably means you've actually got the general manager as the legal rep and as the executive director. So this we've never seen, but these are the kind of issues. Listed companies are different, but I don't think it's going to be really important for people. It's mostly about protecting the interests of the company. But very few people who will be watching this will be working as directors on listed companies. But there are cases now. Actually, I should perhaps resolve from that a bit. We do see foreign companies investing in listed companies, and then they sometimes do have directors, and so they have to be very careful about how they act for the interests of that specific company rather than the shareholder. So so if you are going to be a director on a listed company which your company has invested in, be a bit cautious, and I would actually seek legal advice how best to comply with your obligations.
Well, we also wanted to point out that legal reps do have a duty of loyalty to the company. Mark, can you give us a little bit more background about what is the duty of loyalty?
Yeah, so I think, look, this is all in the company law. It shouldn't really surprise people. I mean, I know the laws do have to put things down, but there are things like not accepting bribes, misappropriation of company funds, or harming the company's interest by using affiliation. So using a position for personal gain, disclosing company secrets, or competing with the company. So I think these are all relatively common sense, but that doesn't mean that people don't do this. And I think few of our clients will see this, that the head office people engage in this business, but it is possible. So I think, again, these duties are not onerous. Maybe people should be aware of them, but if you didn't know this, you shouldn't probably be a director or a legal rep anyway.
And one of the, I guess, more universal concepts here is the business judgment rule for legal reps.
Yeah, so I think the business judgment rule is interesting. Again, I don't think it's onerous. I think, it's whether you're doing a reasonable, ordinary, prudent person's decision. And so I think, all these things by their nature are a bit subjective. But I think, again, it's not like the PRC law has a very onerous level. Again, it's quite common, as we don't really have precedent, even though things are perhaps becoming more certain in this regard. There's no clearly defined standards. So depending on the case, it will depend on the court's interpretation. But one interesting thing is the burden of proof is on the defendant. So as the director or officer, you will have to show that you exercise reasonable business judgment. And so that might mean that you have grounded reasons for doing things. You might have followed legal advice. So if you're in a joint venture where the board is in gridlock or in revolt and they're fighting each other, it's probably important to show that you've followed legal advice. Otherwise, you may well be at risk, personally, for doing things, because it may not be in the interest of the company.
And one of the ways that directors and officers can protect themselves is with liability insurance.
Yeah, so I think, look, there are those directors and officer liability insurance. 10, 15 years ago, we never saw it. Obviously, a lot of the American companies ask about it. yeah, I'm always a bit concerned with insurance, whether they will pay out. I remember once we had a client who had, fire insurance in Liaoning province, and I was actually on the board, and it came up that the insurance company had declined the claim, and the reason was because the fire was an accident, which I kind of assumed would be the real kind of reason you would pay an insurance claim, because it was not a willful fire. But anyway, that was what the insurance company said. So I think that's one issue. But again, criminal liability, all those things. So I think by now, ticking the boxes, people do it, but it's not going to solve all the problems for the director or the legal rep.
Thanks, Mark. I think one other scenario that we haven't talked about yet is what if a legal rep is more MIA rather than willfully disregarding his duties towards the company. So one of the situations that comes up from time to time is that the legal rep is a foreigner from HQ, and it leaves the company or is terminated from the company. And now the Chinese entity, the WOFE or the JV, is without a legal rep. In these types of situations, is there any recourse for the company or for the management to continue on without the cooperation of the legal rep?
So I think, firstly, it's very different in our experience if it's the joint venture or if it's a WOFE. So I think, in most places in China, in experience that we've had is, if it's a joint venture, we will probably need the Chinese partners' cooperation to change the legal rep, even if it's very clear that it's our nominee. Normally it's not a problem, but if we're in the venture partner, will block it. And we have this in Sichuan, we've had it in Beijing, we've had it all over the place. So, so that's one big issue. And then that can also affect, perhaps in a joint venture dispute, your power of negotiation, because like you say, the person's kind of missing in action and it's difficult. I think in a WOFE, it's less of an issue. And the biggest advantage of actually having someone like that in a WOFE is there's very little for them to gain. So I think, even if we've had a client who's had a bust up with the person who was the legal rep in head office, that person, even if they're not very happy with the company, they're very keen to get out of that role because they're worried about liability. So I think, that's quite so I think that's not an issue. It's a bit of paperwork, will take 6 to 8 weeks, but it's much better than having somebody who's the general manager and also maybe the executive director and the legal rep, because that person has a lot of leverage. If you don't want to, if he doesn't agree to go, it's very, very difficult to get rid of him.
So do it early and often. Mark, some of the key takeaways from this short presentation, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So I think, so the first thing is people shouldn't be overly concerned. I think the general principle is the company is liable for its own actions. But there is a remote risk for the legal rep, but also other directors and officers, that you can be liable. But I think this normally only happens if something's gone very wrong, or you've been engaging in something very bad, or if someone's seeking leverage. It might be in a joint venture dispute, the Chinese partner or the foreign partner against the Chinese partner might seek to bring up the specter of personal liability. I think mostly foreign people on boards are at less risk. Normally, if there is like an explosion at a factory, the Chinese will be looking for somebody Chinese. They want to grab somebody locally, not write a letter to somebody, sitting in Chicago. But this is also changing, and liability is perhaps more serious than it used to be. So I think, it's important to take the role seriously.
Thanks a lot, Mark. And if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. Also ideas, we're willing to take entertain most ideas here. And as usual, other videos are on the YouTube channel, which you can check out. And let us know what you think about those as well. Thank you so much for watching.